Hello again. Welcome to the third segment of the discussion of the utilitarian argument for the efficacy of markets. And I'm going to, I hope, remind you, as opposed to telling you for the first time, about some of the weaknesses of the rather elegant little argument that I just discussed. The argument defends the free market system by claiming, showing, proving that the self-interested behavior of market participants following market rules, if they don't follow the market rules, they're going to get into the sort of dilemmas of cooperation that Frank and Bert got into. But if they follow the rules of the market, then they will overall produce maximum economic well-being. And it's kind of cool, except that it makes a lot of assumptions. And the biggest one is this one, that the markets are in perfect competition. And I'm sure that you've studied this before, so I'll just remind you that you can't have monopolies, right? And if you're in perfect competition, you can't have oligopolies. It assumes constant returns to scale, many buyers and sellers, no barriers to entry and exit, etc. Full information, or all the necessary prices of alternatives are all known. There's no informational barriers to market entry. Okay, so there's a lot of assumptions like that go into this proof, and they're often violated. So maybe the proof it's fine in theory, but it doesn't work out all that well in practice. But I'm going to remind you of some of the other assumptions that maybe you're a little less familiar, that result in imperfect competition, or as critics of the market like to say, in market failures. Doesn't work when there's external benefits like technological discoveries where people cannot profit from the discoveries that they made because they've got no way of stopping other people from using them, sort of thing. And in particular, now these are the ones I want to emphasize because these are ones that we're going to need in the next chapter on environmental sustainability. There's no external costs, costs that aren't incorporated into the price. And typical examples here are environmental pollution. There's no public goods, because many solutions to environmental problems are public goods, and there's no way of paying for these public goods. There's no open access or common resources, because these result in problems of like the tragedy of the commons. And there's no transaction costs, and I'll show you their importance in the next set of lectures. And they also assume that willingness to pay measures welfare. And that, as we've seen in the chapter on utilitarianism and again on the chapter on justice, is is controversial. It's not obvious that willingness to pay is a good measure of welfare. So I'm just going to remind you of what some of these things are, because we're going to need them later. So market failures or market imperfections are conditions under which the market is not perfect. It's not efficient. It doesn't do what we would like it to. It doesn't maximize overall welfare. Again, climate change is perhaps an example. It's small external costs within each transaction are not taken into account, and you end up with perhaps what may one day become a giant market failure. Now it's still an imperfection, but it may become a failure. Crucial notion is that of an external cost, which is a cost arising from economic activity that is not incorporated into the market price. And this is true of most environmental pollution. And we're going to, again, this is in chapter 12. And open access resources, or a common good or a non-excludable resource, which is a resource you can't keep other people out of, and that can lead to things like they're often called tragedy of the commons situations, like the cod fishery on the Grand Banks, because everybody went out there to get as many cod as they could get. They were an open access resource. Everybody was allowed to go, and it eventually depleted the resource until everybody suffered. So I'll talk a little more about that in the next chapter, and also this notion of a public good. These are open access goods, but goods that you can't exclude people from, but they're also they're goods that when somebody uses them, it doesn't diminish their availability to others. Something like a fireworks show, you can watch it and I can watch it. My watching it doesn't stop you from enjoying it. The problem here is that because you can't exclude people, you can't make people pay for them in economic markets. But the solutions to many problems, many environmental problems, tend to be public goods, and to many other many social problems. For example, enforcing the private property laws and the liability laws, et cetera, that make the market work, those are public goods, and it's because it's difficult to exclude people from those those rules, from the benefits of those rules. Yet, how do you make people pay for them? Hence the existence of income taxes and things to pay for public goods, like the enforcement of property rights. The big thing that I also mentioned as an assumption is this idea that willingness to pay is a good measure of welfare, basically of how the strength of somebody's preference for something, so that we can then use it to calculate total welfare. It assumes that everything basically is a commodity, can be bought and sold. Again, perhaps violated in environmental situations. The idea, the willingness to pay, is somebody's reservation price. It's the price, that they would be willing to pay when they don't know what the market price is. So this is the price that somebody would be, not is, but would be willing to pay if certain conditions held. And things that would be, as opposed to things that are actually difficult to observe. They're not something that you can easily find out as a revealed preference. So it's for a specified increment of consumption. There has to be an unknown market price for the reason that I said, because people won't pay more than the market price, and it's going to depend on people's income. A billionaire will be willing to pay a lot more for something that that he or she would like to have, even if it's a sort of trivial desire, because they've just got so much money, right? Compared to a college student who has a lot less money, and the student is perhaps going to be willing to pay less for something that they would value just as much. And there's problems with information, et cetera, et cetera. So weaknesses of this view are that ability to pay does affect willingness to pay. Billionaires and students are willing to pay, even though they want something about the same amount. The billionaire is willing to pay more because the billionaire has more, and so it's not a very good measure of what the real utility of something is. People are willing to pay for immoral or unfair or unhealthy preferences. Reservation prices, as I say, are difficult to measure or observe. They're not market prices, so that makes, as a measure of utility, if they're difficult to measure, well, that makes them makes their usefulness a little suspect. And there are lots of things that people don't really want to put dollar values on, like, for example, the right to life. How much is your life worth to you? How much is your life worth? How much would you accept in return for allowing yourself to be killed? Not a nice thought. How would you be willing to sell yourself into slavery? No, you're not going to do such a thing. Would you sell out your honesty and your integrity? Well, no, I hope not. There's no dollar value to be put on these things. So there are lots of things that we value, and willingness to pay doesn't really capture these. Okay, so that's a little brief survey of some of the problems with that viewpoint. I want to raise another one, which is the justice problem. Anytime you have got a utilitarian argument, you have probably got a justice consideration that you should make. So utilitarian arguments talk about the aggregate. They talk about the whole thing, and they don't talk about who gets what. They talk about the size of the pie, but they don't talk about who gets how big each person's slice is. But if this argument was right, that the best way to maximize the production of goods is to use the market. Okay, this is the indirect utilitarian claim that we were talking about. The then if you believe in justice, you should probably first of all use the market to create goods and services, and then afterwards redistribute them to the, well, in whatever democratic or egalitarian or just way you think is correct. And this is what John Rawls's difference principle says. This is the it's associated with John Rawls, an American philosopher who died about 12 years ago. The difference principle says that a distribution is just if and only if everyone receives the same, identical, equal resources, unless an unequal distribution results in the least well-off receiving more than in the strictly equal distribution. The idea is that you're allowed to provide incentives for people to do more as long as they lift all the boats. Well, at least in Rawls's theory, it's not lift all the boats, it's lift the smallest or lowest, or the boat most likely to go off the deep end. So, and so basically you get a capitalist system with capitalism, but you also get a proportional income tax and some sort of welfare system, redistribution system. And we can see how this works, just a little table here. In this case, we've got the free market with no redistribution. Okay, so there's three participants, Ron, Sally, and Tom. Ron gets 1,100, Sally gets 12, and Tom gets 3,000. The total is maximized, and it's the maximum of all these distributions, but because the free market maximizes the total the total resources that are available to people. But it doesn't do it in what we might call any sort of egalitarian way. Tom gets more than twice as much as everybody else. The old sort of socialist model of everybody being equal, let's say the Russia of the 1950s or something, the centrally planned equality of welfare, does give everybody the same. It is egalitarian in this way. The only trouble is because it doesn't allow for incentives for people who contribute more. It turned out, and basically, it was an economic. The Cold War was an economic war, and the United States and its allies won because they were more efficient at producing things than were the centrally planned economies, and that, in part, was because of this argument that we've been talking about. So here we've got we've got equality here, right, between these things, but the total here is less than the total here. 3,000 is 5,300, and that was the trade-off between equality and efficiency. Now, it might be possible to regain some of that efficiency, and this is Rawls's idea, that a free market combined with a redistributive taxation system might have some loss of efficiency. So the 5,100 here is less than the 5,300 from above, right? But it's not that much less. It's not like $3,000 is less than that. So there's some loss of efficiency because perhaps somebody doesn't work as hard as they can. But everybody is actually, well, Ron and Sally are both doing better. And the least well-off person in this, who this according to Rawls you should focus on, Ron, who had 1,100 under this distribution, benefits, right, between here and here. So you're allowed to have the incentives that bring the productive efficiency up, but at the same time you still treat everybody fairly, according at least the Rawlsian view, that you should look just make sure that the least well off are treated as well as possible. All right, just to review then, let's go back to that notion of a market failure. Remember, a market imperfection. The indirect utilitarian argument works best in when it's describing a market which is in perfect competition. Market imperfections. What is the market imperfection or market failure? Which one of these shows a market imperfection? Pause the video for a moment and think about that. Okay, well, at least all the answers are about stuffed elephants. Why, I can't remember when I made these questions up. I must have stuffed elephants on the brain. let's work up from the bottom here. Let's see if I can find my pointer. Oh, there I am. Okay. So no two stuffed elephant collectors can make a trade without making at least one of them unhappier. Well, that's actually that describes a market, an efficient market, right? No, there's no everything is distributed Pareto efficiency. This is not a market failure. It's actually the definition of an efficient market. So it's not that. At the stuffed elephant auction, Joe stopped bidding when the price reached $20. Okay, so in this idea, there's no market price for stuffed elephants. There's just an auction. When Joe stopped bidding, that's basically was Joe's reservation price. That's the maximum amount he was willing to pay for another stuffed elephant for his collection. So that's not a market failure. That's just part of the definition of willingness to pay. The expenses, sorry, what did I do here? Expenses involved in doing business with the foreign supplier of stuffed elephant parts proved prohibitive for the firm. Well, here we're talking about internal costs. It's the cost of buying stuffed elephant parts from some supplier. Again, this is just regular market behavior. This is not a market failure. So, leaves the top one. The price of stuffed elephants does not reflect the lowered market prices of houses downwind of a highly polluting stuffed elephant factories. This is a market failure. What you've got going on here are external costs, right? The external costs of pollution that are not incorporated into the price of the stuffed elephants. And that is a market imperfection or a market failure. So that is your answer. Okay, so that, first of all, I wanted to introduce you to this argument. It's widely influential. People say, well, the efficiency of the free enterprise system is of overriding importance and justifies the system. And I just want to remind you of some of the problems with that because of the assumptions of the argument. And we'll look in more detail at those assumptions in the chapter on the environment and on sustainability. And I also want to focus on this idea that whenever you have a utilitarian argument like that, you should look for problems of distributive justice, and you should probably look also for possible problems of rights violations. In these cases, actually, you don't find too many rights violations because the utilitarian justification of markets seems to be fit fairly seamlessly with the libertarian justification, and people often conflate the two, but they are two different things. One's coming out of rights, one's coming out of maximizing utility. All right, see you in the next lecture.